The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you and enjoy. Tonight I'd like to share a little bit about a component of practice which can be really quite transformational. And first, I'm just curious, how many of us here would have classified yourself as an extrovert? If you can raise your hand, okay. And how many of us introverts? Yeah, I thought it was more of a collection of introverts here. Nothing like going to a group where you sit quietly with your eyes closed and go home. I'm a board-certified introvert myself, and 3 qualities that demonstrate you're an introvert. First is the feeling of happiness you have when the elevator doors close before anyone else gets in. You know that one? And the indescribable feeling of joy you have when someone cancels on you. And the one I like is if you ever find yourself at a party saying, "Now where did that cat go? Excuse me." So I'd like to talk a little bit about the power actually of being around other people, particularly like-minded people. Have you ever noticed how much easier it is to meditate when you're in a group? Anyone notice that? I've thought about this. I think part of it may just be the kind of the collective juju that comes from having, like-minded people focusing together. But it also just may be that when you're in a group, it's too embarrassing to get up and walk out, Especially if you're in the middle, excuse me, I've made a terrible mistake. You're not going to do it, you're going to stay. There's a saying we always used in the ashram where I live, that company is stronger than willpower. That when you're aligned with others who want what you want, and you can draw on the energy of that group, it can really, really help you move toward whatever it is that you want. Whether it be a workout partner to embarrass you into going to the gym, or focusing on deepening your practice. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that, some of the essential teachings around this. The first part really being exploring just how tribal we are in our nature, and how oftentimes in our desire to belong, sometimes we betray ourselves. We kind of find a sense of false community. And a little bit on what it means to really be yourself, and at the same time to be part of a community and to contribute. And then some of the deeper teachings around community. Right after I finished grad school, I got a teaching position in New Mexico, and I immediately sold my car and bought a motorcycle and started exploring New Mexico. And there was a little town of Bernalillo, just north of Albuquerque, where there's ancient ruins of a pueblo. And I remember this so well, reading a little plaque about this pueblo. And Coronado, who first came to New Mexico, conquering and settling, he had written how remarkable it was that everyone in the community was healthy. Like he said, there's no one that looks ill or sick or maimed. They're just very, very vibrant. And I thought, isn't that amazing? I wonder what they were doing. And then I read the next paragraph, and that is anyone who was in any way crippled or deformed was killed. It seemed pretty harsh, but I can also imagine, in the 1500s, at that time, life was very, very difficult, and the community could only carry so many people. Everyone had to contribute. But it really says something about our essential human nature. You know, if you're at all strange or weird looking, you're going to be eliminated from the herd. And that is an essential part of our psyche. We all want to fit in. Or as Tom Peters in his book In Search of Excellence, a long, long time ago, he said, part of the psychology is we all want to fit in and we all want to stand out. You know, we have that very curious element where we want to belong, but we also want to be special. But not too special, because if you're too special, then you're killed off. So we're all looking for that fine line. Where do I fit in? And the greatest way to punish someone is to turn them out. To turn your back on them, isolate them, pretend they don't exist. Because it literally means death. I grew up in the Pennsylvania Dutch country. You know, had a lot of Amish and Mennonite kids that I hung out with. And there were always these stories of some of the Amish who went off the reservation and were literally shunned. There are people who never spoke to their families again. And it's part of this fundamentalist streak we all have. And fundamentalism, from what I can tell, basically says, if you disagree with me, then you are my enemy. And we all do that. We all create people that we make wrong. And it's a very interesting question. You know, who is it that you shun? You know, who do you judge and hold as separate? There's a lot of judgment and a lot of shunning going on in our culture right now. And I'm a little embarrassed to acknowledge the contempt that I have for certain people. Just reading about Portland and the fighting in the streets is just horrific that's happening in our culture right now. So we like people who are like us. And we have a negativity bias where we're always screening for danger. A friend was telling me how he got in an elevator, no one was talking to each other, of course. Not the place for conversation, but someone said, nice weather, it's really warm for January. And he said, yeah, I'll take this over Wisconsin any day. And someone else in the elevator said, Wisconsin? You lived in Wisconsin? He said, well, yeah, I went to college in Wisconsin. He goes, where? Madison. I went to Madison too. What year did you go? Suddenly, this cold elevator became friends finding each other because they found their commonality. And the secret in spiritual practice is to see that commonality, to see self and other in self. That's the possibility of transcendence. But we tend to live in separation. You've probably heard this story, but it's one of my favorites. I was walking across a bridge one day, and I saw a man standing on the edge about to jump. I ran over and said, stop, don't do it. Well, why shouldn't I, he asked. Well, there's so much to live for. Like what? Are you religious? He said, yes. Me too. Are you Christian or Buddhist? Christian. Me too. Are you Catholic or Protestant? Christian. Me too. Are you me too. Are you Episcopalian or Baptist? Baptist. Wow, me too. Are you Baptist Church of God or Baptist Church of the Lord? Baptist Church of God. Me too. Are you Original Baptist Churches of God or are you Reformed Baptist Church of God? Reformed Baptist Church of God. Me too. Are you Reformed Baptist Church of God, Reformation of 1879? Or Reformed Baptist Church of God, Reformation of 1915. He said, Reformed Baptist Church of God, Reformation of 1915. I said, die, you heretic scum, and I threw him off the bridge. So we're always looking for separation, and we feel separated. And there are severe consequences of loneliness. And I don't know about you, but I talk to a lot of people who feel very lonely. When you feel lonely or isolated, your cortisol levels go up. And when your cortisol levels go up, they impair cognitive performance. They compromise your immune system. They increase your risk for vascular problems, inflammation, and heart disease. And it's, of course, intimately tied into mental health issues, such as depression or anxiety. And loneliness is really considered by many people an epidemic in our culture right now. We're the most connected we've ever been through social media, but there have never been as many people who experience extreme loneliness. And when you feel lonely, it is very, very hard to break out of that cycle. I'd like to talk a little bit about how you can do that. We have such a fear of being ostracized, kind of a real baked-in part of us, because it's so tied into our core survival. And so we go to lengths to not be ostracized. And quite often there can be a betrayal to ourselves in order to fit in. A while back in one of the the week-long meditation retreats, there was someone, a middle-aged guy in the retreat who was obviously in a huge amount of pain. And in one of the private interviews I had with him, he told me a story. He was raised in an Orthodox Jewish family, a super dysfunctional family, but he played his part. You know, he got married, he had children, and then he realized that he's gay. And yet married in this very, very ultra-Orthodox tradition. And absolutely ripped up inside, absolutely torn up. A very, very deep sense of self-betrayal, feeling utterly stuck. And as we explored this in his life, I asked him, I said, what would it take for you to come out, to your family? And he said, I can't. He said, my son, my daughter, they would never talk to me again. I would never be able to talk to them again because they're very, very religious. He said, I cannot make that sacrifice. And this is the world I know. This world knows me. And I met with him again later in the retreat, and as he sat with it for days and days and days, he made a decision to live with it, just to carry that inside. That's, of course, a pretty extreme example. But I think in many ways, all of us give up something in order to feel like we belong. The people who hate their job, but it pays the mortgage, or with kids in college and bills to be paid, or in a relationship that's not fulfilling, but too afraid to break loose and try and start over again, or putting up with some kind of behavior in your life and just sucking it up. This whole practice of mindfulness is all about seeing clearly, seeing through your story, your preferences, and seeing what's actually true. And inevitably that happens. you begin to see more and more clearly into the nature of reality. And when you look closely, what do you see? And we have the classic foundational insights of the four noble truths. Suffering is part of life. If you look closely, you will find a cause of suffering. And the cause is about identification and clinging. And you'll see that you can actually, when you see it and you bring compassion to it, you see that you can actually let go of what you're holding on to. But there's a path that supports you in that journey. You see into the three characteristics of reality, that everything changes. Anything you resist will result in suffering. And who you take yourself to be is also changing and changeless. You also see into the nature of cause and effect, that every action has a reaction into the nature of karma. And when you begin to transform, when you're more and more informed by those laws of nature, and you begin to wholeheartedly cooperate with reality, your life begins to change. And it's not necessarily an easy, glorious flowering of your being. Quite often there's resistance, either internally or externally. When you look at family systems theory, to oversimplify it, everyone in your family system has got you figured out and locked in. So if you change, that means they have to change, which is why they'd rather kill you off than change. So changing in a family system is very, very difficult because you're combating the whole system itself. So to begin to wake up to who you really are is a fascinating practice. The classic teaching, when the Buddha said, this practice is swimming upstream. It's not only against your own conditioning, but 2,500 years ago, he said, it is against the entire culture. As one of the Buddha's insights in his awakening was, oh my God, everyone is looking for happiness in exactly the wrong way. They're looking for happiness through the senses. So what does it mean to be yourself and to belong, to actually belong? My personality type is maybe changing a little bit, but for the most part, extremely non-confrontational. For me and my family system is all about just fitting in, and inevitably building up the resentment that goes with fitting in. So at work, I was asked to take jobs that I was reasonably good at, and I agreed for the greater harmony of the family system. And as a result, I was in a lot of meetings and with a lot of strong, dramatic personalities, a lot of drama. And in order to get things done, I was mostly silent and kind of going along with it. And as you can imagine, doing this for an extended period of time resulted in two things: anger and depression. And depression is pretty much anger without the energy. So I'd waffle between not having energy and feeling depressed and having some energy and feeling angry. And because I'm a board-certified introvert, I wasn't so much around plotting revenge as it was as doing what board-certified introverts do, which was plotting my escape. Here's how I'll leave. But eventually I caught on to that whole dynamic and how much that was such a part of my life, that pattern of appeasement and so forth. And when I really investigated, I kind of got under the depression and really into the anger. And something popped into my mind that really changed my life. And it just sort of came from deep inside, where I just said, I'm going to be me until I'm fired. And I did something really uncharacteristic for me based on that. And that is I started speaking up. I started objecting to what I thought were stupid ideas. I started tossing out suggestions as to how I would go about solving the problem. And rather than being excommunicated, the response was, wow, who are you? Where have you been? And suddenly I was invited into a whole new level of participation. And it was a dramatic shift where I was actually being myself and new opportunities were opening up. Sometimes it doesn't work that way. You know, you're yourself and you realize that where you are is no longer a match for you, or they realize that you're not a match for them. But for me it worked, and I've kind of used it as kind of a bumper sticker phrase for myself. Just to be myself until I'm fired. It's been a lot of fun. It really has. There's some very, very cool developmental models out there, but one of them says how the vast majority of us have given up some form of independence in order to belong. You know, so you have a job, but it pays the bills. Or you take a job because you want to live near your family, not exactly there. Kind of the next level is then you're an expert, you know, you're a professional, you're a leader, but you're still kind of part of a tribe. And what this developed model does is because that sets you up for what's kind of called the individualist phase of your life. And that's where you ask yourself, wait a minute, what do I want? Am I just living out the story that was implanted me by my primary caretakers? What's my life about? Knowing that I'm going to die, how do I want to live? That's your 40 days and nights in the desert, which can be an hour or the rest of your life. But on the other side of the desert is the possibility that you can be exactly who you are and be contributing at a really, really high level, a really effective level. But that takes a certain degree of chutzpah to first of all, to listen to the deep dissatisfaction you may be feeling, and then the courage to take that deep dive and ask yourself, what is your life all about? When you look back on your rocker at 102 years old, what will be most important in this life? So there's a fascinating paradox as you go through life, and I experience this all the time in spiritual community, particularly when on a retreat. If you're doing a long silent retreat, I always describe it as being alone together. You know, you are deeply, deeply alone, and at the same time, you're alone together. Something is held by that intentionality of community. And it sets up a fascinating paradox. I love looking at leadership. You know, we tend to think that leadership is sort of like this ego-driven force where you're bending people toward your will. And we certainly see that on display. But there's a quality of what we could call the enlightened leader, or the servant leader. And this is the leader where the leader senses where a group can go. She sees the potential of the group, and she devotes herself to the whole betterment of the group. The decisions she makes are for the group. And she works to empower individuals in their expression, to bring out the best in each person so they feel alive and expressed. It's this whole idea of the servant leader. a letting go of a separate self and sacrificing toward a greater good. And we see this in the very best leaders. The team captain, when they receive praise, they instantly acknowledge everyone in the team. Or the executive who's willing to confront a difficult person for the harmony of an executive team. Or a manager who listens to everyone before making a decision. It's this paradox that we have, that we all want to belong, but we all want to stand out. So much of spiritual practice, if you will, is a very deep internal dive. And every one of us is fighting our own battles. Every one of us here has the causes and conditions that have created this conditioned life that you're living. But there's something very, very interesting. How in the middle of that deep internal dive, something inevitably rises for those who practice, and that is the realization of our interconnectedness. Chris McCandless, you may know his story from the book and the movie Into the Wild. A very, very idealistic young guy who gave away all of his possessions and just hitchhiked around the country and reading a lot of Thoreau and had this fantasy of just living alone in the woods, and hitchhiked up to Alaska and just lived in the bushes. And as the story goes, he got very physically isolated there and kind of ate the wrong foods and got weaker and weaker. But his realization was that what he was really looking for through his life journey was actually love and relationships. It's a really beautiful book and a very beautiful movie if you ever want to see that. From the tradition where I spent many, many years, Swami Kripalu in India was quite a renowned yogi. 19 years of silence, 10 hours a day of meditation. His big realization, in Sanskrit it's referred to as Sanatana Dharma. And Sanatana Dharma is literally translated as the world is one family, where we're all connected. And his message at the end of his life, after all of his practice, was really summed up by saying, the key to your heart can only be found in the heart of another. That's the product of an entire life devoted to practice. In the Lakota language, there's a phrase called that says "matakwyasan," and that phrase is translated as "all my relations." And again, it's an expression of wakefulness. It's a prayer of harmony with everything, with animals and birds and insects and plants and rocks and rivers. In the Buddhist tradition, the Buddha's realization and teaching was to see yourself in others and see others in yourself. And when you can do that, that sense of a small self falls away. We spend so much of our life thinking that we're just a wave cut off. But when we have those transcendent moments, we actually realize that we are the ocean. We're the wave and we're the entire ocean. And that's what happens when the self falls away and we move into what Thich Nhat Hanh refers to as our interbeing, the interconnectedness of who we are. So then the question becomes, well then, how do you cultivate a greater sense of connectedness if you're not feeling connectedness? And one of them is actually to focus on the consequence of not connecting. Take some time to really feel the consequence of staying isolated, and to really reflect on the implications of your physical health, your mental health, and your well-being. You know, I live in the woods, and I love living in the woods. My folks lived on a farm, and they elected to live pretty isolated. And it was very, very clear that they stayed in the woods for too long at the end of their life. They would have had a much better end of life if they had found some kind of intentional community where they were seen and heard and someone knew their name. It was very painful to see that, but it also helped me to make a determination that I'm going to try not to do that. I don't know how, but that's not how I'd like to spend the last 15 years of my life, with that sense of isolation. So, really reflecting on the consequences of isolation and loneliness, it is very, very hard to break out. But if you can, the interconnectedness of relationship is a very powerful healing force. One place to start is to reach out to someone who might be hurting right now. Someone you know who may be struggling or in pain. And to take some time just to reach out and let them know you're thinking about them. It can be a very, very small act on your part, but it can have immeasurable effect. Another possibility is to make connections with people you haven't thought of in a long time. Just to reach out and say, I'm thinking about you. I just want you to know I'm wishing you well. Last year, I made a list of people who were kind to me, and just took some time on a regular basis just to reach out and thank them for kind of unexpected, unmerited kindness. And it was a really fun thing to do. Another thing, when you begin to sense how could you make more quality connections, is to really reflect on what is it you most enjoy? What are the things that you really, really enjoy? And are there others who are doing those things you might make a connection with? And again, if you're a really introverted person, you really got to screw up your courage and reach out. Whether you enjoy yoga and could explore the yoga community, or being in nature, there are a surprising number of groups that like to go out and experience nature together. A friend of mine is really into urban sketching and realized there's an urban sketching community out there. People are really, really into it, and kind of the joy and satisfaction you get from someone who really is into what you're into. Again, take some courage, but it can be really, really helpful. And just to say that through the Insight Meditation Community of Washington, there's really a real intention to help people to connect. And we have something called spiritual friends groups that get together on a regular basis to meditate and just in a very safe environment just to share what are you noticing in your practice. To me, that's one of the most wonderful things. And you may know the story of of Ananda, who was the Buddha's assistant. And he came rushing up to the Buddha with this great insight. And he said, isn't it true that spiritual friendship is half of the holy life? And the Buddha reportedly said, no, don't say that. Spiritual friendship is the whole of the holy life. As I like to say, finding community is perhaps the most powerful thing you can do, and perhaps the most challenging thing you can do. But when you find people you resonate with, it is extraordinary. I had the experience many, many years ago, way back. I did a lot of biking, and I joined in a group of riders where we would do we would form a peloton. If you're familiar with the peloton, where you keep your front wheel about 6 to 8 inches behind the rear wheel of the bike in front of you. And you've got to be very, very concentrated. But what happens is if you get 15, 20 people that tight in, it is insane how fast you can go. And the person up front is the one breaking all the wind resistance. They're doing the work. But as soon as they get tired, they just go to the left, they come back, and they go behind. So each person takes turns, kind of sacrificing themselves for the group. But when you're in that harmonious dance, it's extraordinary what a group can do that is far beyond what 25 individuals can do. So it's helpful to reflect on what is it that you most want in this life? Are there others who want what you want? And is there some way you might find inspiration or connection? That is one of the most invaluable things you can cultivate in your life, certainly what I found. And it's an absolute pleasure and joy to be sharing this with you. Thank you for your time and your attention. And I thought we might close with a little sit before we end. As you're ready, you can let your eyes close. And just notice the movement of the breath on the inside and the sounds around you. And in your own way, just sensing the person to your left or right, behind you, in front of you. In your own way, imagine you could wish these people well. Wishing them a sense of ease. And imagine you might be able to receive the well-wishing offered directly to you. and sensing this shared exploration of what it means to be alive. We'll close with this short reading by David White called Self-Portrait. It doesn't interest me if there is one God or many gods. I want to know if you belong or feel abandoned, if you can know despair or see it in others. I want to know if you are prepared to live in the world with its harsh need to change you. If you can look back with firm eye, saying, "This is where I stand." I want to know if you know how to melt into that fierce heat of living, falling toward the center of your longing. I want to know if you are willing to live day by day with the consequence of love and the bitter, unwanted passion of your sure defeat. I have heard in that fierce embrace, even the gods speak of God. And as you're ready, you can deepen your breath. And when you're ready, you can let your eyes open.